All right, Rear Admiral John Gower, retired, is a former commander of two British submarines and former Assistant Chief of Defense Staff, Nuclear and Chemical Biological, in the UK Ministry of Defense. And he has just put together a report for Asia Pacific Leadership Network on the AUKUS deal. Hi, John.
Hello, Dana. Good to see you again. Of course, good. I must emphasize that it was co-authored with Tanya Ogilvie-White, who works directly for the APLN.
It's always an honor to talk to you. And what were the two British submarines? Do you remember the names of them?
Oh, I think so. I think I remember every ship and submarine I ever set foot on. I commanded HMS Unicorn, who was the last diesel submarine in the Royal Navy and is now HMCS Windsor in the Royal Canadian Navy, and HMS Trafalgar, who was the first of the Trafalgar class and is now Razor Blades.
In Razor Blades.
Yeah.
Most of us have no idea what submarines do in peacetime. And so what's it like spending a career on submarines? And tell us, I mean, what is the strategic game underwater? Is this hide and seek in peacetime played to what end?
Well, a multiplicity of ends, because a submarine can access international waters without raising tensions because it does so unobserved. And so if there are areas of international water that raise tensions, you can place submarines there routinely. So you would do that just to keep an eye on things. Secondly, you would want your submarines to be familiar with the waters in which they operate, which they may have to operate in tension and in war. Submarines are also extremely good at gathering intelligence because they do so unobserved, and therefore what they are watching doesn't change because they're there.
Right. Some of these submarines,
so all of those things are conducted by submarines, however they are propelled.
Right, and some of them are diesel, and some of them are nuclear.
Yeah, I mean, I took HMS Unicorn into the Gulf and operated her in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf, and I took Trafalgar around the world under the ice through the Panama Canal and operated in the South China Sea, and in fact visited HMAS Sterling in Perth, the main Australian submarine base today.
So what are we doing sending submarines to Australia so that they will chase the Chinese around the Indo-Pacific? I mean, what is the idea?
I mean, that I wouldn't characterize it the way you've put it, Dana. We're not sending submarines.
Well, it's meant to be provocative, John. It's meant to be provocative.
I understand that. There is a program has been outlined, the detail of which, and the devil is always in the detail of which has yet to be hammered out, that the Australians will procure a number of SSNs using a power plant that is derived from the UK program or US program or the joint programs that have been running since the 1958 agreement. This will replace the now aging Collins class submarines and deliver what Australia has always forecast the need to have a presence in the South China Sea and to its critical sea areas to the north, predominantly to the north of Australia. And it has always, because of its various governments' position on nuclear anything, whether it be power, weapons, or propulsion, has always up to this announcement plumped for the diesel electric solution to that operational need. But they've always recognized, or at least those who make the judgments on what is necessary, they've always recognized that delivers a suboptimal solution given the distances, predominantly the very large distances involved. And SSNs can get to places faster and they can stay on station wherever they are for longer. The former is a product of being nuclear powered. The latter is partially that, and partially because they end up being bigger so they can carry more food. And it's generally food that is what determines the endurance of a submarine. It's not the propulsion system per se.
China's really pushing out militarily. I mean, they have a huge military. People are worried about them just taking over the Indo-Pacific and doing whatever they want there around their neighbors. Their neighbors are nervous. Just placing submarines generally, whether it's Australia or whether it's any of the sort of, Western allies, if we want to call them that, Is that a deterrent to China, where it says we're not abandoning the Indo-Pacific, we're not about to give you free rein to do what you want there. These are international waters.
Well, there was the very old Russian saying, I think it's attributed to Lenin, or Stalin, but I'm not sure who, that if you push your bayonet at someone and you meet soft flesh, keep pushing. If you meet armor, stop. And so there is a deterrent effect to what is being done. AUKUS didn't specifically name China, but fundamentally, any analyst sees this as a means of increasing the burden sharing capability in the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific to counter what China is seeking to achieve, which is a broadening of its sphere of control. It's doing it through the Belt and Road Initiative, it's doing it through economic means, but it's also doing it through an attempt to gain national control over international waters in the Spratlys and the Paracels and elsewhere. And this impinges not only on the AUKUS, in fact, it impinges more on the allies of the AUKUS who are around that South China Rim, whose national waters or economic zones lie within the area that China is seeking to control. And so the AUKUS announcement is a more general announcement about upping the ante a little bit to push back, not in a provocatively escalatory way, but to push back against what would otherwise be a simple Chinese building on top of success and gradually becoming unstoppable. And the submarines are the point of the AUKUS sphere, but AUKUS goes much broader than just buying submarines for Australia.
One of the organizations that has been pushing into the Indo-Pacific and has been pivoting maybe away from Russia and more towards China is NATO. So suddenly you have France, a key NATO member, one of them, angry about this deal with the Australians and the fact that the UK and the US seem to do it behind their back. According to the French, they say it's a knife in the back. So just before we get into the ins and outs of nuclear propulsion, submarines, just politically, don't you feel that this has caused a major rift in NATO and a very concerning one?
I think, I think language like knives in the back and stabs in the back make good headlines, but I'm not sure that's the enduring nature of the issues. I think it's absolutely clear that there were problems with the Australian-French submarine deal, whatever the optics have been presented since then. I think also, although I wasn't privy, obviously, to any of it, that at the macro level, or at the Macron level, you might say, the diplomacy of informing the French that the Australians were going to change heart in time for them to adapt to that was, well, frankly, inept. It just was not terribly well handled, and so you have this explosion on part of it, genuine how can I trust you again, fist shaking, but also a little bit of manufactured ire about about how well the submarine deal was going before it was pulled out from under their feet. So I think there's a mix of that, and I don't think it's shattered NATO. NATO itself isn't really pushing into the Asia Pacific, but NATO members of NATO, UK, France, and the US, recognizing their desire to continue to have global influence. France has a history in the Indo-China region, as does the UK. So I think there is never room. There's never room for any dissent in NATO. It should never be fomented, because Russia is a past master at levering that. So that's regrettable. But I don't think as people settle down that that's going to be the serious issue. I think there will be some continued petulance, and I don't mean that but the French are angry, and they see they have a right to be angry, and that's going to continue. It's possible that out of this, the French will end up leveraging some pretty good results elsewhere geopolitically on the back of clearly both the UK and the US and Australia wishing to mend those fences. So I think my view is the French will box clever over the next few months, and although they may still smart over the submarine deal, I think they'll probably leave us some diplomatic activity to get what they want elsewhere. So
a lot of arms control experts believe that France should be brought back into this, that the UK and the US just driving forward and ignoring the concerns raised by France and now the European Union, by the way, because as we speak, the European Union was supposed to be sitting down discussing a free trade deal with Australia today, and they suspended talks. So the EU has gotten behind France.
Yeah, and there is as I think, as if you read in the paper that we wrote, there is a sense that amongst a lot of the Asia Pacific nations that the EU's policy on Asia Pacific, which is some time old now, is much more inclusive and accepting of the needs and the primacy of the needs of the nations with whom it seeks to do business. Whereas you could read, if you were minded so to do, that the AUKUS was a little bit of an Anglophone imposed, this is how we, the three English-speaking nations, two of whom rim on the area, one is 10,000 miles away, feel that we should be doing business in the Asia Pacific. So I think there is some dissonance there. And I think some degree of post-announcement diplomacy, as always, is going to be needed. I think it is challenging to bring the French in, however, in that rather simplistic way, because you have to go all the way back to Suez to understand why UK and US are on one side and France is on the other, because UK and France went in together in Suez, and the US essentially slapped them both on the wrists and said, back off. And from that, in '56, this is my judgment and others, the UK decided, we can't really do anything without being on side with the US, and followed that with the '58 agreement, the Polaris Sales Agreement, the close linkage of intelligence communities, all of the special relationship. The UK decided after Suez, we have to be with the Americans, and France said, we can't trust the Americans. Those are the two essential things. So France went off on its own nuclear program, submarines and weapons, and the UK went off essentially following the US in both of those. And so the French reactor design, the whole methodology and everything to do with their sense is very national, and the UK-US is very bilateral. So bringing the French in, so to speak, to the program has a number of challenges. It's not impossible, but it's not as simple as some of the commentators have indicated. It's not just a political decision.
Let's talk about Australia. Should Australia be trusted with highly enriched submarine power plants, nuclear power plants, that my understanding is that the same highly enriched uranium with some tweaks here and there can be used in weapons? So Australia has more of a past with seeking a nuclear program than some people might realize. And should they be trusted with this now?
Like there are many countries who in the past, and I'm talking the 60s, even before then, or up to the 70s, had either programs or investigations into whether they should become a nuclear weapon state. In fact, it was awareness of all of this that led to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in the 1970s as a way to try and stop all this speculation leading to proliferation. But they firmly said no. And I think the possibility that Australia would develop a weapons program because they had highly enriched uranium-fueled submarines is zero.